Hey, greetings everyone. It's GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we played World of Warcraft Classic. We continued on that journey with our Night Elf Druid this time as she went around through Teldrassil, helping some satyrs, harming some satyrs, and just generally trying to help the citizens of Dolinar. We've also been reading about the World of Warcraft Classic zones, but from a Dungeons and Dragons perspective, and for the Bronzebeard's perspective, with the lands of Northrend being the most recent chapter. So stay a while and listen as we continue with Coldarra, which is kind of discussed already as its own zone. Capital also the Nexus, ruled by Malygos, who has stats in a previous book, a book that will be revamped, I think, a little bit as we continue. I said the Borean tundra was the most isolated part of Northrend, but that's not exactly true. It's the most isolated part of the mainland. Coldarra, its nearest neighbor, is the only island in Northrend, not counting the two lifeless rocks down by the Howling Fjord. The only access point is the bridge across the West Rift, and to get across that you have to gain the permission of the blue dragons guarding it. No one sets foot on Coldarra unnoticed or unannounced or uninvited. Now, I do believe that that bridge is destroyed, if not non-existence, not in existence, and I also believe that Cascala is technically a series of little islands. Coldarra's name suits it. The entire island is made of ice, great jagged peaks that rise from the cold ocean like pale blue fangs. Some of those peaks rise high enough that you can see all the way to Crystalsong Forest and even to the dragonflight. I had a clear view of Iceground Citadel as well, though I didn't dwell on it. How the dragons live here I have no idea. I guess the cold doesn't bother them. Dragons are the only inhabitants, not counting the occasional sheep or mountain goat. Rumors say that visitors sometimes stay to study with Malygos or record his tales, but no one settles permanently. The dragons don't allow it. That also means Coldarra has no scourge presence. I think even the Lich King knows better than to invade this place. He wouldn't gain much by trying, and he might anger the dragons into retaliating, so the scourge stays on the mainland, and the dragons live in peace with their thoughts and their magic and their icy cliffs. Not to mention it's the blue dragonflight, which is definitely erratic, and I think the Lich King would be hard-pressed to defeat a dragon aspect. People and culture. Blue dragons are fascinating creatures. They consider themselves the guardians of Azeroth's magic and know more about the arcane than any other race alive. Supposedly Malygos the Spellweaver, their ruler, actually created magic, or at least codified it so others could study the arcane arts. It must be true since dragons do not lie, except for Deathwing and a whole bunch of others. They are a strange race, thoughtful and somber except in flight when they become as carefree and joyous as children. I found them pleasant and cordial and eager to trade tales and ideas, but blue dragons have no need for coin and have ample food, but they delight in knowledge and in samples of new crafts. The dragons are not at all religious. They say science is truth, and religion only myth and misinterpretation. Despite that, they treat Malygos with a reverence you would normally expect only due a god, and they commune with the spirits of their dead. Considering the Black Dragon Deathwing killed most of the Blue Dragons long ago, they have a lot of spirits available. For more information on the Blue Dragon flight, see Chapter 6, Civilizations. That's our next chapter. Also, I feel like it's not the same. Religion is not the same. Religions as institutions in Warcraft are, how do people manifest their worship of certain powers, specifically the light in the void? The light unarguably exists in this universe. It manifests all over. However, how that light is tapped doesn't have to be pure, as we've seen with the Scarlet Crusade, with some of the blood paladins that we've read about, the blood elf paladins that we've read about in our book, where they've basically enslaved a Naru. A Naru is a creature of the light. So also the Titans and the Keepers, they also exist and are sort of godlike. So there's no interpretation. Whether or not you choose to devote yourself to worshiping these forces is just a choice and a pursuit of a particular power path. It's the philosophical aspects and the tenets of the religions, such as those of the Silver Hand. Now, that's a whole different thing. So religious choices become more like philosophical choices. So I think that little aside right there is kind of useless. It's pointless, and I wouldn't really consider it canon. That blue dragon belief that science is all that's important in religion is hodgepodge, whatever. Geography. Coldarra is a large island, at least relative to the Northrend mainland. It is roughly a third as long as the mainland, though only as wide as the tip of the Borean tundra or the Howling Fjord. Coldarra has no beaches and no gentle shore. Its edges rear up as cliffs from the surrounding water. Most of the island rock is covered by thick ice, though here and there enough dirt has gathered to produce tough grass or small bushes. The dragons themselves live in caves fashioned from the cliffs and mountains, or in handsome stone buildings carved into the peaks. The island has no roads or bridges save the one linking it to the mainland. The dragons fly everywhere and carry guests from place to place. I think an experienced climber could scale the peaks, though, if he had their permission or somehow evaded their notice. Sites and settlements. Coldarra has only one real settlement. Blue dragons, I discovered, are solitary creatures. They prefer to live alone and meet only for discussion, flight, or mating. One exception to the dragon's solitary existence is the Nexus, Malygos' home and the dragon's center of knowledge. And I actually think that's more by necessity. There are just so few blue dragons left, and their leader is mad, so there's nothing tying them together. The Frost Bridge. One bridge spans the West Rift to connect Coldarra to the Borean tundra. It is narrow, but more than 100 feet across, and arcs slightly. The top is rough to provide purchases and has a small lip along the edges, enough to keep travelers from walking unknowing off the bridge, but not enough to stop someone from being pushed. Blue dragons watch the bridge at all times and stop travelers from crossing without declaring their names and intentions. Some Tuscarr nearby call this the Frost Bridge, and they have a tale as to why the dragons built it. Let's read about that tale, the Tuscarr legend of the Frost Bridge. At some point a few centuries back, a human came to Coldarra to see Malygos. This man was a scholar and wished to exchange ideas. The great dragon chose to see him and had the man flown to the Nexus. For months they communed and formed a great friendship, but then the man returned to the world and his duties. He came back several times, however. Finally, Malygos ordered a bridge fashioned across the West Rift so his friend could approach unaided. The Nexus is a scholarly retreat, very small. Originally Malygos' lair, the Nexus has expanded considerably as other blue dragons choose to live near their leader and partake of his wisdom. The Nexus is an extensive series of caves and tunnels that riddles Coldarra. Every space has been carved and smoothed so that it seems more like a castle buried in ice than a natural formation. The walls are ice and crystal and cast rainbows of light from small glowing gems set in strategic locations. Most flat surfaces are carved to show dragons in various activities. The floors are solid stone, polished glass smooth, and mirror bright. No stairs exist. In many places an archway opens onto a vast open chamber, and the dragons simply fly across to another portal placed somewhere on the other side. The outermost chambers are dotted with lifelike ice statues, or so I thought. These statues are the remains of uninvited guests transformed by dragon magic and placed here as a warning. The caves themselves are fascinating, and many have unusual magical properties. I am sure some actually changed while I was visiting, but I chose not to ask for fear of angering my hosts. History. The blue dragons say Malygos, the oldest and greatest of their kind, created the spells that set the sky and earth into motion. Harnessing the world's magic and developing these spells took millennia. He settled here in these ice cliffs during that time. That's not true. The blue dragons wouldn't tell that tale unless they were intentionally being misleading. Other blue dragons joined him, though many lived elsewhere in the north. Then the black dragon Deathwing attacked the blue dragons, slaughtering them by the dozens. The survivors fought back, but they were no match for Deathwing's ferocity. In the process, their homes were destroyed and the land so damaged it could never recover. This area became the Dragon Blight. Malygos, in his rage and grief, split his home from the rest of the land, creating the gap later named the West Rift. That's not why it's called the Dragon Blight. As we read in Dawn of the Aspects, it's more called because that's where the body of Galakron fell, and that's where many dragons come to die, to kind of join the bones of Galakron. Not because that was the site of the main battle between the blues and the blacks. The remainder of the blue dragon race settled on Malygos' island, which they named Coldarra, and carved out homes of their own. They gave up the war against Deathwing and the black dragonflight and chose to withdraw from the world. Soon they lost themselves in study, though they always looked toward the dragonblight and the spirits of their kin still lingering there. Adventures. Coldarra is an irresistible lure for arcanists. Malygos is unquestionably the most powerful arcane spellcaster in all Azeroth, and designed not only most spells, but the theories behind them. His libraries could make any mage powerful beyond our dreams, and even a few words with the ancient blue dragon could grant power and wisdom most mortals never achieve. That's pretty much true. Scourge Cure. An ancient scroll found in a Northrend ruin mentions a spell that can remove undeath from a huge number of creatures at the same time, laying the undead creatures permanently to rest. Such a spell could rid the world of the Scourge for good and strip the Lich King of his power. The scroll has no details, but if such a spell does exist, the Blue Dragons of Coldarra must know it and possibly have it. All that remains is to gain access to the island and ask them, or barring that, sneak onto the island unnoticed. Sneak into the Nexus and search for the spell without getting caught. I mean, I think that's an interesting hope, but you'd have to be very careful about putting that in play, because that could change the entire dynamic of the Warcraft universe if your campaign put that out there. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for watching, for listening. I appreciate you. I hope you enjoyed it, and this episode is in the pipe, 5x5. See you next time on Lore of Warcraft.